You
Three
two,
men
step
in
away from the
matching
door now.
windbreakers stood
Please,
at my
officer,
front
there's
door,
been a mistake.
clipboards
No
in
mistakes,
hand,
hands where I can see
attempting
them.
to affix a bright orange sticker to the wood that read, "Condemned, HOA Order 774. The only problem was that I didn't have an HOA. I didn't have neighbors either. Hell, I barely had reliable cell service out here. It was just me, my cabin, and the very distinct sound of a shotgun being racked from inside. I stepped out onto the porch in my boots and bathrobe, coffee mug still steaming in my left hand. "You boys from the Homeowners Association?" I asked, with a tone that made it clear I already knew the answer. They took one look at me, then at each other, and bolted like deer that had just spotted a mountain lion. One of them dropped his clipboard in the mud. Another tripped over my garden gnome collection. The third one, bless his heart, tried to maintain some dignity by speed walking to their van, but his windbreaker snagged on my mailbox and ripped clean down the back. My name is Dean Holbrook, and I live what most people would call a blissfully quiet life in my log cabin on the edge of Lake Antler Estates. Now, Lake Antler Estates sounds fancy, but it's actually a failed suburban development that went belly up after the 2008 housing crash. The promised golf course never materialized. The community center remained a concrete foundation overgrown with weeds. And the HOA that was supposed to govern this suburban paradise officially dissolved in 2012 when the last board member moved to Florida. Everyone else left too. Everyone except me. I stayed because I love the solitude, the 40 acres of pine forest behind my property, and the fact that nobody could tell me what color to paint my shed. I grew tomatoes that won ribbons at the county fair, fed the local raccoon family that had adopted me, and carved walking sticks that I sold on Etsy to hipsters who thought owning something handmade gave them character. I'm ex-military, mid-divorce, and fully uninterested in anyone else's drama, which is why I chose to live where the nearest human was, a solid 15-minute drive away, or at least that's how it was until Beverly CR showed up. Beverly was a former pageant queen who'd peaked in 1992 when she won Miss Corn Festival 3 counties over. She had recently decided to move back to restore order to Lake Antler. Even though there was nothing left to restore, she brought with her a self-appointed board of directors consisting of her sister Patricia, her cousin Gerald, and some guy named Todd, whom I'm pretty sure she was paying in sandwich coupons. They all wore matching embroidered polos with Lake Antler Estates Community Preservation Council stitched across the chest. Beverly had a vision, and that vision was total uniformity and total control. The fact that she had no legal authority to enforce anything was apparently just a minor detail she chose to ignore. It started with the letters thick envelopes stamped with a fake HOA seal that looked like Beverly had designed it herself using Microsoft Word clip art. The first one informed me that my non-standard vegetable structures, which normal people call tomato cages, violated community aesthetic guidelines. Section 4.3. The second letter demanded I paint my cabin a more community cohesive top, instead of its current natural wood finish. The third one really took the cake though. It claimed I owed $428 in back dues for a snow removal fund. We lived in an area that got maybe 2 inches of snow per decade, and there were no roads to plow anyway, since the development was never finished. I laughed so hard at that one, I nearly choked on my morning coffee. But Beverly wasn't laughing. She was escalating. Next came the surveillance. I started noticing drones buzzing over my property at odd hours, always circling my vegetable garden like mechanical vultures. Then there were the clipboard guys, different ones each time, parked in beat-up Dodge Neons at the edge of my property line, pretending to be inspectors. They'd sit there for hours, occasionally taking pictures with their phones, writing notes that I'm sure said things like, "Target remains non-compliant with made-up regulations. 1 Tim." I walked out completely naked except for my boots, and watered my tomatoes while maintaining eye contact with them. They left pretty quickly that day. Then came the threat-certified letters warning of lien proceedings and something Beverly called forcible aesthetic enforcement, which sounded like she'd been watching too many dystopian movies. Each letter got more unhinged than the last, with increasing amounts of legal-sounding gibberish that would make any actual lawyer weep. I decided to have some fun with it. I posted one of Beverly's letters on a wooden sign at the end of my driveway with my own addition underneath. The letter said, "Final notice of non-compliance," in big red letters. My response, painted in cheerful yellow, read, "You ain't real. Stay off my property." I even added a little cartoon of a bear eating a clipboard for good measure. The sign became something of a local attraction. People would drive out from town just to take selfies with it. Someone even started a hashtag cabin guy versus fake HOA that got a few thousand likes on social media. Beverly was not amused. In fact, she was so not amused that she decided it was time for what she called, in her next letter, the nuclear option. That's when things got really interesting. The attempted seizure happened on a Tuesday morning. I was inside making pancakes when I heard vehicles pulling up. Not just one vehicle, but three. Through my kitchen window, I watched as Beverly's compliance officers, which is what she called her unemployed cousins in matching windbreakers, got out with fake badges dangling from lanyards around their necks. They had official-looking documents in plastic sleeves, portable printers, and the kind of confidence that only comes from complete ignorance of actual law. The lead guy, who I later learned was Beverly's nephew, Roger, knocked on my door with the authority of someone who'd watched too many cop shows. He announced through the door that my cabin was in breach of architectural dignity and that they were here to begin seizure proceedings under HOA Statute 997.6. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At the sheer audacity of it all, I opened the door, wearing my favorite bathrobe, the one with flying pigs on it, holding the coffee mug that said, "I've buried worse," in large letters. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there sipping my coffee while Roger stammered through his rehearsed speech about community standards and the greater good. Behind him, his two accomplices were trying to look official while clearly being uncomfortable with the whole situation. One of them kept adjusting his fake badge like it was choking him. That's when I casually shifted my weight, allowing the business end of my legally owned shotgun to become visible just inside the doorframe. I didn't point it at anyone. I didn't even touch it. It was just there, leaning against the wall, a friendly reminder that this was private property, and I took that seriously. The transformation was immediate and hilarious. Roger's eyes went wide as dinner plates. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing flat on his back in my herb garden. The guy with the nervous badge fumbled his clipboard, sending papers flying everywhere like confused butterflies. The third one, who hadn't said a word the entire time, simply turned and ran full sprint toward their van, his windbreaker billowing behind him like a superhero cape. Roger scrambled to his feet, muddy and humiliated, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "This isn't over," he declared with all the authority of a substitute teacher on their first day. "You'll be hearing from our legal team." I took another sip of coffee and said, in the calmest voice possible, that I looked forward to it, and asked whether they'd like me to call 911 now to report trespassing, or if I should wait until after breakfast. They left so fast, they forgot to pick up their scattered papers, one of Roger's shoes that had come off in the mud, and most importantly one of their fake badges. I collected everything, especially that badge, which I later had framed with a little plaque that read, "World's Worst Attempted Seizure, October 2024. I turned the shoe into a planter for my porch. It grew the best petunias I'd ever seen." The papers were even better. They were filled with complete nonsense references to laws that didn't exist. And my personal favorite, a seal that said, "Authorized by the Municipal Authority of Lake Antler Estates." The municipality of Lake Antler Estates consisted of exactly 0 people with any actual authority. I called the sheriff that afternoon, and I hadn't even finished telling the story before he started laughing. Sheriff Morrison had dealt with Beverly before. Apparently, she tried to file complaints about everything from unauthorized bird feeders to suspicious garden gnome placement in the county. He said he'd been waiting for her to do something actually illegal so he could finally take action. Well, Christmas had come early. He came out to take my statement, took pictures of all the fake documents, and bagged the badge as evidence. Then he asked if I had any security footage of the incident. I didn't, but my neighbor Jim, from 2 miles down the road, had been driving by and caught the whole thing on his dash cam. The footage of 3 grown men running from a guy in a pig bathrobe went viral within a week. The sheriff visited Beverly that same evening. According to the report I later read, she tried to claim she was operating under the reformed bylaws of the Lake Antler HOA. When asked to produce documentation of this reformed HOA, she presented a binder she'd made herself, with colored tabs and everything. The problem was that she'd also been collecting dues from several part-time landowners in the area, telling them it was mandatory for the Lake Antler Security Fund. That fund was actually just a Zelle account linked to her dog grooming business. Beverly's pristine paws. She'd collected almost $12,000 over 6 months from people who didn't know any better. That's when things shifted from funny to federal. Mail fraud, impersonation of officials, and unlawful solicitation were just the start of the charges. The county prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra Jeff, took particular interest in the case. Turns out Beverly had been on her radar for a while due to various complaints from her dog grooming clients about mysterious upcharges and missing deposits. This fake HOA scheme was exactly the evidence they needed to build a comprehensive case. Beverly's compliance crew, faced with the prospect of actual criminal charges, immediately agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity and the promise that their names wouldn't be released publicly. Nobody wanted to be known as the grown men who ran screaming from a guy in a bathrobe. Beverly was arrested on a Thursday morning while hosting what she called a community standards workshop at the local library. The 7 attendees, all of whom thought they were there for a legitimate HOA meeting, watched in shock as she was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about the degradation of property values and the importance of color-coordinated mailboxes. Her sister Patricia tried to film it all while declaring this was a conspiracy against community improvement, but she was holding her phone upside down the entire time. The footage that did make it online came from a librarian who couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The trial was swift and decisive. Beverly tried to represent herself initially, which provided some of the most entertaining courtroom moments the county had seen in years. She attempted to cite HOA precedents from other states that had nothing to do with criminal fraud, presented a PowerPoint about the importance of neighborhood aesthetics, and at one point tried to submit my tomato plants as evidence of community degradation. The judge, who had clearly had enough by day 2, strongly suggested she get actual legal representation. Her court-appointed attorney looked like he'd aged 10 years by the end of the week. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecutor presented the fake documents, the embezzled funds, testimony from the people she'd scammed, and my personal favorite, a recording of Beverly at a town council meeting declaring herself the supreme authority of Lake Antler Estates, while the actual council members tried to explain that wasn't a thing. Her cousins testified about how she'd convinced them they were doing important civic work, paying them in gift cards to participate in what she called compliance actions. Roger, still traumatized from the cabin incident, admitted on the stand that Beverly had told them they had the same authority as real HOA inspectors, which he now realized was completely insane. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. Beverly was found guilty on all counts. The judge, barely suppressing a smile, sentenced her to 3 years in prison, suspended to probation with 800 hours of community service specifically focused on actual community improvement under legitimate supervision. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to everyone she'd scammed, plus a $20,000 fine to the state. The best part was when the judge added that she was permanently barred from forming, joining, or participating in any homeowners association real or imagined for the rest of her life. Beverly's jaw dropped so far, thought it might hit the defense table. She turned to her lawyer and said, in a whisper that everyone could hear, that this was a violation of her constitutional rights. The judge reminded her that there was no constitutional right to commit fraud, and the court was adjourned. Beverly fainted right there in the courtroom, knocking over the defense table on her way down.